Namibia is an upper middle income country that has enjoyed substantial growth in its economy that averaged 4.6% last year. It boasts of a stable political system and a significant reduction in poverty levels. In spite of this, the country still faces economic challenges that triggered downgrade since the end of last year. Central to the recent downgrade by Moody's to junk status is government's debt that increases yearly, as well as a wage bill considered to be one of the highest in the world. The downgrade was received with widespread criticism, with government stating that it does not truly reflect the situation on the ground. The Namibian Chamber of Commerce and Industry sees the downgrade as a wake-up call and a sign for government to get back to the drawing board and re-strategize on its priorities.
Good evening, viewers, and welcome to Unexclusive. I'm your host, Joseph Sheefeni. I'm joined in studio by the President of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Sven Thieme. Mr. Thieme, welcome to the program.
Good evening, Joseph.
We've quite a number of topics to discuss, so let's get right into it. Let's start off with unemployment. We've seen a rise in unemployment over the last couple of years, and the Ministry of Labour just announced that over 1,000 jobs were shed in the private sector alone in the last 3 months. Is this a sign of hard times ahead, looking at this figure?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think the hard times are there already. Obviously, it's predominantly driven, with the cuts in spending of government. Many businesses lived off that spending from government, being at the small businesses like an architecture or a plumber and so forth. So that certainly has an impact on the employment generation or losses in jobs. I think this is nothing new. But again, I think the important thing at the moment is that we survive and get through this tough or hard times, as you said, find efficiencies and more effectiveness throughout to make sure our services going forward as a private sector is better. And then once the economy picks up, that we have the benefit, again, of those the opportunities from the tough crisis, and thereby generating new jobs again and so forth. And the key is, absolute key is, for job generation is that we add value locally, find ways of generating local services, local manufacturing, being it clothing, for example. Like maybe all corporates need to stand together to source clothing from the local industry, and thereby generating quite a number of jobs again.
Now, we know that government will be injecting about 3 billion into the economy by the end of this month. How will that, assist in, getting the economy on its feet again?
Yeah, I mean, part of that is really settling debt that is existing, but obviously that enables the various businesses to move forward and maybe generate or at least curtail further job losses. Whether that will stimulate job generation straight away, I don't think so. I think it will take us quite some months to get through that. And as I said in the beginning, it is more to settle debt for many businesses that are where the money was owed to.
Let's look at the downgrade by Moody's Investor Services. Government described it as a sour pill to swallow. As a representative of the private sector, what do you make of it?
Yeah, I think it's highly disappointing, the downgrading by the Moody. I think if I look at back in history, that the rating agencies have often only done a retrospective grading or perspective on matters. I think it's even claimed that in 2009 that the rating agencies are partly or wholly responsible for the global financial crisis. And I think what we see at the moment is a very similar situation. I think we got a rating about 7 months ago, which was still fine, and then when we as the government, or the government has identified a lot of measures that need to be undertaken to ensure that we get the financial and fiscal consolidation, then we were rated. I mean, it's like, as I said now many times before, it is like giving us a report after the rain season, whether it's rained or not. I mean, that we can do ourselves. So we shouldn't overrate this. Certainly as a business point of view, we need to, it's business as usual. We need to continue. I think you would normally expect with such a downgrade interest rates to go up, but as we just seen a decrease of 25 basis points, and maybe in the long term it will impact us, but I don't think we will be sleeping and not reacting and doing what needs to be done, so to prevent the impact of a long-term interest rate cost, and rather see that we maybe get an upgrade pretty soon. Again, I'm certainly hopeful. Yeah. With all the measures we've undertaken already by the government.
As a businessman, let's look at the credibility of Moody's now after this downgrade. It's received, widespread criticism across the country. So, will you still trust its ratings after this?
It's very deep. The credit rating agency have a vital role to play, but it may be a reference point only. I think that the world has changed so dramatic that today, just looking at quantitative aspects or financial aspects is no longer good enough. I think today, in today's world, we have to look at the planet, how a company or an organization or a government manages the planet as well as the people, which is probably a lot more important than anything else. And I think if we look back at the global financial crisis in 2008, 2009, too much emphasis was put on financial performance only. The whole trend today goes to look beyond that. And I think if the rating agencies want to stay relevant, they need to up the game, especially to evaluate things beyond just quantitative numbers. They need to be all-inclusive in terms of the stakeholders that need to be interviewed, why they believe things are going to go better, or what else we've got in place, because it's the other things that guarantee the financial performance. It's not the other way around. So I think, to your question back, I think if their rating agencies want to stay relevant, I think they need to up the game and look beyond just quantitative figures.
Let's look at a scenario 2 or 3 years from now, whereby the Namibian government has failed to resolve some of the challenges facing the economy that led to the downgrade. What are we likely to see in terms of the condition that our economy will be in?
I think the downgrade, certainly, first of all, is very late. I think if there should have been a downgrade, it shouldn't have been this year. It should have been long before. Number one, I think the fact that the government has taken a number of measures right now, as you know, curtailing expenses, finding ways of channeling money into the areas such as poverty alleviation, income inequality, and economic growth going forward, is going to be very, very important. And if we continue to do that and not spend money on buildings which are non-productive, not adding any value to the nation, then I think we will get out of the dilemma that we are in now very quickly, very, very quickly. I think in 2-3 years' time, maybe we'll maybe much more healthier and maybe even better as we were before, because I think a lot of work is done towards improving the administration of the government, and also working together as Namibians. The Public-Private Partnership Act, all these things work towards developing a greater economy, and I'm very hopeful, and I see a good future.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that the expenditure right now on building this one, it's basically just waste expenditure. They should instead spend the money on grants and programs that improve the lives?
Correct, yeah. I mean, do yourself a favor. If you go to Western Katutura, you still find people having to carry water for quite a few meters, maybe almost a kilometer some. Or the schools where we invested together with government now into container classrooms, which are very, very, it sounds like a container, it's like very sophisticated rooms, very interesting. And when you see that and you drive back to the city and you see the new building of Home Affairs, for me, it's beyond my understanding. How can we have build investment in such building and not invest in water supply or roads, for example, in Western Katutura? It goes beyond me.
$1 billion building.
Yeah. Can you imagine what it could have done with that money?
But we often ask government, why it continues, with elements like the building of new buildings, and they maintain that it's quite the norm in other countries as well. Do you agree?
I think the fact that the government has stopped investment in various buildings is a clear sign that there's a full understanding and agreement that this is not the way to go forward. I don't know who we want to compare ourselves to, but I still believe that we should have set our own standard, and it doesn't excuse at all. If you look at some of the areas where a lot more of the investment is needed than in the buildings, those buildings don't produce a cent, not at all. But investment into the people, that will produce a return. So I don't think who we want to compare ourselves to, but fact is that, as I said, we should set our own standards. That's it.
Government listed poorly performing SOEs, as a factor for the downgrade. Now, we asked the Minister of Finance, Kali Sledvan, at the press conference right after the downgrading as to what they're going to do about these entities because they are a liability to economic growth. And his response was that they are looking into ways to dealing with these parasitals, which clearly indicates that they have no concrete plan on what to do with them. What do you think should be done to bring this problem to an end?
I think the first thing that we need to be very mindful of, the definition of insanity, means that we think that we do things over and over again the same way and expecting a different result. Now, I think if you look at the SOEs, clearly it's the leadership. That's an issue of the various SOEs. If we had proper and good leadership in the SOEs, we wouldn't have been there where we are. The point is here just who appointed those people. And I think this is where ministers need to be held accountable to, not only boards, for the well-being or the performance of SOEs. And I think then we'll speak a different language. The current curtailment of expenses or cash on SOEs is probably the right thing to do, but it will not bear any fruits unless we've got a plan. Now, and I do know, for example, that Namibia is an organization that we will not be able to turn around without any cash, as an example. Probably we need to, they say numbers, anything between 17 and 19 billion that needs to be invested to be able to make it competitive again. So clearly the government, or we as a country, we are not able to resolve all SOEs at the same time, but maybe we'll select one or two this year and one or two next year and develop a plan together with the SOEs to ensure that they get turned around. I mean, it's like the business principles. If we want to up the game in our business, we have to invest first to get the return, to get the results. And that's probably with many SOEs there. Some money needs to be spent before you can sustainably reduce expenses. That's for sure.
You speak of the board of some of these entities. being at fault somehow. But let's look at the case of the SME. Some blame was put on the board chairperson and so on. However, the president maintained that they are not at fault because they were forced into those positions.
The SME is very interesting to me because, there's a foreign component on there. I don't understand why we needed that. I also, ask myself the questions: who put the people onto the board? Have they got the background? I don't think they have. I'm not so sure. And if we look at the DBN, when we created the DBN, I think that we were Namibians only. We created the DBN, and it's a sustainable organization still today. So why would we? We're often relying on people outside the country. Many of us got the skill. We have the people in Namibia, and then we just need to put the right people on there, and maybe not, for pleasing people to be on there. No. We have to get people that are interested in performance and creating things. That's where it begins and ends.
Right. Speaking of the SME, tell us how its closure affected some of your members, especially with regards to the fact that they might have, been trapped by the liquidators.
At the moment, I think the impact of the closure has not been completely felt. I think we're still going to feel more of it, that's for sure. The question is also, how effective was the SME Bank so far? Maybe it wasn't that effective, and therefore it doesn't make such a big difference on the other side. And then, of course, the interesting part now and the important part now is to look forward to see what else we can do, as opposed to living back in the past. And I think it needs to be cleared out. It needs to follow its legal courses and to be resolved. And then that's one part of it. But the second part of it is that we need to look forward and find a ways how we're going to deal with this need of funding for the SMEs.
You mentioned the Development Bank of Namibia earlier. It now has to bear the burden and accommodate all these, SMEs from across the spectrum with the closure of the SME Bank. But do you think it's up to the challenge?
Yeah, it's not easy, that's for sure. Whether it's the right place to house it, that's another question. The Development Bank is normally developed and has the objective of funding major projects, larger projects, that has like infrastructure and so forth, and not necessarily SMEs. I think it actually doesn't matter where it's going to be housed going forward. We need to have the skill, and maybe we have to get all the banks together, that they generate a service. Why do we want to duplicate a service or a bank again? Maybe we need to find a common, or find a way that all banks are entering this business, and thereby through their existing infrastructure supply the service, not to make it even more expensive once again. So maybe there's different ways of dealing with this, but whether the DBN can deal with it is a separate question. It depends, how they're going to resource themselves in terms of to deal with this. But as I know, DBN is right now not made for that.
All right. So basically what you're saying is that the Development Bank might not assist these small businesses. But now, does this mean that, doesn't this take Namibia backwards?
Yeah, the question is always, what is backwards? I think sometimes we need to learn. I saw a saying this morning, we only learn in hard times. We don't necessarily learn in the good times. And I think as long as we learn from this, I think we're going to move forward. Obviously, if you're going to repeat the same mistakes, we'll move nowhere. That's for sure.
I mean, because certainly those SMEs might have nowhere else to go, with the Development Bank now only focusing on bigger projects.
Yeah, Obviously, I don't know to what extent that is, there's DBN is going to take it over or not. But I think there will be. Yeah, I think if the banking sector puts their heads together, they will have and need to find a solution to this.
The Bank of Namibia closed the SME Bank because the bank has become insolvent. Well, government supported the move because it can no longer fork out money out of government coffers. So, was this the right decision to make in the first place?
I think to where the SME Bank got to, it was the absolutely right thing to do by the Bank of Namibia, as well as the government to follow due process, legal process, to deal with it. The question is just, how did we get there? And I think if we can analyze how did we get there, to ensure that we don't make the same mistake we've learned. If we are going to establish another SME bank, whether it's going to be a function of other banks or whether it's going to be a centralized function, as long as we learn from those mistakes, I think then we go forward, hopefully in a positive way. But I think one needs to admit, to learn that there were mistakes were done. What were they? How do we address them? How do we make sure we don't repeat them? And then we should be fine. Everyone makes mistakes as long as we learn. That's all.
All right. You were just reappointed at the last year in June as the president of the chamber. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what your plans are now?
At the moment, we are very busy with a huge drive to see what role we as the NCCI can play. We have taken some initiatives to and try and find a way of getting all chambers and associations of Namibia together to find common ground, common interest to how we can play a significant and relevant partner to government. And that's the biggest thing we're doing right now, to make sure that we become relevant and also a partner that can support and help government to get through our crisis. But we're all in it. It's all our issue. It's not only helping government. Maybe government can help us, vice versa. We're all in the same boat here.
And I should say, NCCI has been quite effective. Let's look at the case of the trucks, that were stranded in Zambia for 5-6 months. If it wasn't for the NCCI, they'd probably still be there.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we will be seeing more, NCCI playing more of a critical role in the future in terms of, taking on issues like that.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah, of course, but it's very important that we as the NCCI also reinvent ourselves. Have we always been most effective? No, we have not. But the challenge now is, how do we reinvent ourselves, be more relevant, more effective, and especially in an efficient way. We need to find also a way that the enterprises of Namibia or business of Namibia, finding a cost-effective way of generating a one voice. And what we have too many associations all working on their own. If you look at, there were 120 submissions on NIF to government. It's pretty sad. We need to develop a one voice attitude to align, to find a much more effective way to be a force of significance and a partner to government.
Right. Any last words from your side on this?
I can only plead that we are, adopting a mindset in Namibia that what can I do for the country and not vice versa. What the country can do for me. I think that there will be a part of the.
Kennedy, is it?
What's it?
Jeff Kennedy, is it?
Yes, yeah. And the second thing is we need to support local. We need to bring thinking to everything. We need to find ways of replacing imports. And there is no way around that. We have to have local value adding. This is the only way how we're going to survive and weather storms going forward.
But are we getting there in terms, because we we still import less than, what, 70% from South Africa for products. Are we getting there?
I certainly, what I can feel and hear everywhere, people starting to having the conversation. I mean, that's a start. People start, how can we support local? And that so far wasn't, I haven't heard it before, although I was a fighter for that for a long time. But I mean, at least now the conversation is starting. How, what else can we do? And I love this thing about people saying, sometimes say, the local products are more expensive. At the same time, they ask you, can I have a job with you? You should then ask people, maybe you should find a job where the product is produced, and then people think twice. Maybe the dollar that you pay extra sometimes on a local product is actually towards poverty alleviation and giving people a job. So, also the importers or the foreign companies, if they really find Namibia so lucrative, why don't they build factories here? Why don't they do that? That's the question we need to ask. Because if we want to live from consumers here, we need to generate jobs and we need to generate income and not export our money.
Thieme, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that is all we have for you this evening. Be sure to share your views and comments with us on our social media pages or by texting them to the number 555. Until next time, from me, Joseph Sheefeni, and the One Exclusive team, goodbye.